Welcome back to the Student Athlete Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Lemke, and today we're joined by Jesse Bradley. He is a former pro soccer player and current chaplain of the Seattle Sounders. Jesse does a lot. Jesse's a pastor. He is an author. He is a speaker in general. So not just to the Sounders, but in general. I saw that he's been featured in a lot of different news outlets, even Good Morning America, NBC, all the different things. So, a big topic that we really want to get into and look at more big picture today is identity in sports. This is really going to help you guys take a bigger picture as athletes and kind of see how you should be focusing your energy and how you should be focusing to keep going and to keep the course while still having a more solid foundation. So Jesse, thanks for joining us today.
Nick, I appreciate the invitation and all you're doing, speaking in schools, Nike clinics, serving the community in Seattle, and your podcast. So thank you. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jesse. So I wanna start off with something a little bit more on the story side. So obviously you work with the Sounders. I'm curious if there's any specific experiences you've had with some of the players that really transformed how they played or just how they lived.
Yes, we just completed the season for the Sounders. We almost made it to MLS Cup, final four teams, but it was a great season. A lot of grit, a lot of prayer. We've seen our chapels before service really grow. And some of the things that happen there, it's a bond. Because when guys share deeply, when guys are praying with each other, a lot of times in sports, you have to present like you have it all together, present strong for a contract or for playing time or the opposing team. You've always got to carry yourself a certain way. And in what settings can you let your guard down and be real? And to be able to create a safe place where there's trust and then guys are building each other up, that's really strong. So what I saw is that the team was tested early on. It didn't start out well in terms of results, but it was almost like a lot of the guys started to dive deeper in their faith and see God answer prayer. And, it could be an injury and then there's a recovery. It could be a loss in the family. Georgie lost his dad this year, and that's tragic, but he really walked close with God. And there was a lot of healing comfort. The teammates rallied around him. And there was just a lot of times during the season when someone might not be where they want to be, but then we keep praying and then there's a breakthrough. And just saw that so many times, even a guy like Nathan stepping up in the playoffs after the injury and be able to step in there and play incredibly well. And they beat LAFC. So just a real team effort and a real close team. A guy like Christian Roldan would say we're closer than we've ever been. Just so much. It felt like family this year. And that culture, I think a lot of that does tie into faith, and receiving God's love helps us love one another even more.
Yeah, for sure. And so you mentioned even just with the injuries, it made me think about our topic today. How is tying identity closely to sport? How can it be dangerous? And then in those examples of the injuries and things like that, how can that impact their identity?
Right. One of the traps with identity is to have it performance-based. And I want to make it clear that what you do is not who you are. And I just shared that with some of the Sounders teams, the academy teams, because there is a trap for athletes that their worth, their value is based on how well they do in the games. And that's a cruel roller coaster ride because you become inflated and deflated. If you're performance based, it would be easy to have pride if you're doing well. It'd be easy to have shame if you didn't play well. And none of that is really healthy. And personally, I didn't realize that until after my career ended. Tragically, I was playing overseas in Africa. And then I took a prescribed medication to prevent malaria. It built up toxic levels in my system. And I was fighting for my life for a year, Nick. It took 10 years to fully recover. And that's when I learned some of these deeper pieces with identity. That's when I made some shifts. I had put a lot of pressure on myself as a player. And I think sports, especially early on, it was number one in my life. Now, I had a childhood dream to make it, as a professional athlete. And I was I'm so thankful to experience that. Yet at the same time, without even realizing it, it's like a blind spot. I think identity is a blind spot for a lot of athletes. And because of the illness I went through, I had to slow down. I wasn't playing. And I had to really think, okay, who am I? If someone asked you, who are you? I think NASA does this as an exercise. They say, who are you in their applications? That's what I've heard. And you have to answer in like 50 words or less. All right. What would you say? And what I discovered is that if you can lose something, that shouldn't be your identity. I could lose my health. I could lose my athletic career. I could lose my money. I don't want to put my identity in something I can lose. So the shift for me personally, and everyone's on a different journey with faith, but for me, I didn't grow up with any faith. And then a relationship with God was something I discovered at Dartmouth College. It was unexpected. But that later would become my anchor, where I know I'm loved. And that love, that grace, there's a security there that I'm always going to be accepted by God, part of his family. And that ended up being a place for me that I discovered and went to when it felt like everything else was falling apart. And we need something bigger than sports. Sports are great. Sports teach us about life. Sports reveal character. Our identity can never be in sports, performance, achievement. And I went to an Ivy League college and it was similar there. It was either grades or sports. And when I didn't have something to do, and there was no like area to improve in my life, I thought, well, like, okay, now what do I do? Who am I? And it's identity is much more of a receiving than a striving. It's not an earning. And I know with academics and athletics, everything it feels like is earned. So it's strange to shift to identity and receive. But I believe, grace is an undeserved gift and it's receiving love. Sometimes athletes are great at, competing, but they're not great at receiving. And that was just a huge shift for me, even to let people in. And I thought, the areas of my life that are successful, people are going to want to talk about that. But I didn't know how to let people into the areas of my life where there was doubt, where there was confusion, where there was pain, despair. And that was new for me. But I'll add this, Nick. When you have a secure identity, that security leads to authenticity. And I believe the most authentic people, you have that security. If you're insecure, now you're going to have image maintenance. We all have two stories of our life, the outside story that people see on social media as they observe us, little glimpses of our life, but the inside story is the real story. And when the inside story is secure, then I think you're comfortable in your own skin and you can be authentic. So those two things are really tied, identity and authenticity.
There's a lot of good clips in there. I really like the one that stuck with me the most is the don't put your identity in something you can lose. Like, I think that's something that so many people, athletes, entrepreneurs, like business people, like really anybody, actors, everybody like puts that identity in something that we can lose. And then when we lose that thing, we fall apart. So how do we find that balance between, because a lot of our athletes, they may have a faith or they may have something else like deeper, but then they also want to go D1 or they want to go pro. Like, how do you balance those two things?
It's perspective, and it's good to have goals. Athletes are going to be pushed and they're going to give themselves fully to what they're doing. And Nick, I love all the things you bring with nutrition. It's like that's one side of it. There's sports psychology because there's the mental battle with sports. And then there's the physical side as well. And then there's skills and training and lifting weights. And it's like there's so much going on. So a secure identity actually fuels purpose and passion. And I think that you enter in a way that it stays in perspective. And so it doesn't define you and you're not as easily rattled. Now, there's a lot of things in sports that are out of your control. You don't know how the team's going to play. You don't know if the referee's going to make good decisions. You don't know if it's going to be political. Like, I've tried to go from like regional teams to national teams, and it's like, oh, there's a lot of politics there. You don't know what the opposing fans are going to say. When I was a goalkeeper, like they'd be shouting things behind me all game long. Like, there's just a lot of things that are out of your control, including your health. No one chooses like, oh, I think I'm going to tear my ACL today, right? Like, that just happens, and then you're out for a year. So with all of that stuff out of your control, you've got to remember, okay, what is going to be intact? What's secure? What won't be lost? And so for me, I go back to those different pieces, and I can always choose my attitude. I can always choose how I respond. I can always choose how hard I work. And also, like, I'm loved by God. Nothing can separate me from that love or take that away. So there's just some things that will stay intact. I can always choose gratitude. And when I felt like there's nothing to be thankful for, when I went through that loss of my career, I call it a gritty gratitude, but I would come up with 10 things every day and I'd write them down. I'm thankful for these 10 things and I'm going to choose gratitude. And a lot of those choices, it's empowering. And we all want to be really everything full potential that we've been given in terms of gifts, talents, opportunities. Absolutely go all out, but don't do it fear-based. That's not going to bring out your best. When you're secure, you're going to see the big picture. You're going to think we for the whole team, not just me. You're not going to be selfish. When you're secure, you're going to look to help other people, serve other people. You're going to look to give back in the community. You're going to set an example. You're going to be inspiring. So all that comes from security. Nick, it's kind of like the root and the fruit. And we had fruit trees in our backyard in California, but some of those would wither. Some of those had a great harvest, and then some of those died. And you go back to what's going on in the roots. And the depth that you have, it's going to show up. If you're healthy in your roots, it's going to show up in 20 areas of your life. And you can see in athletes pretty quickly if there's good fruit or not good fruit. I mean, even in pickup soccer games for me, after an hour, I can kind of tell the guy's character, just for 1 hour playing sports. I think for job interviews, they should have people play sports and drive, those two things. It's like you kind of see character right there. So it's going to be revealed, but that deep work that goes beyond the field, what happens in those deep places, what happens off the field, when that's healthy, there's an overflow on the field that's going to produce a lot of great results.
Yeah, I love that because, I mean, again, that especially that last piece of that off the field work, because I think so many of us focus on what we're doing in the field or in our, in our discipline and our specialty. Like we're so focused on that versus focused on more of that, the off the field stuff. So let's get into some of the like how to overcome and some of the specifics here. So first of all, let's get into your 3 R's, because I do feel like when we talk about identity, when we talk about these struggles that a lot of athletes are going through and will go through, and it comes a lot down to that fear overall, like you mentioned, fear of failure, those negative thoughts, lots of negative thoughts. Like, let's talk about your 3 R's and how that can help athletes overcome some of that.
Absolutely. And Nick, I love it that you're reaching young athletes, because a lot of things I'm sharing today and things that helped me, I didn't receive till college. Like we brought in a nutritionist in college. That was a game changer. None of that was on my radar. And then the weights that we started to lift in college, that was new. Faith was new for me in college. Some of the insights for sports psychology and that mental game, that was new in college. But I feel like what you're doing intentionally with a passion is to bring that to young athletes. So here's something I call the power of the second thought. And I share it with, the young athletes. I share it with the professional athletes. And this has to do with choices you make with your thoughts and how many thoughts we have every day. So thousands of first thoughts, and we can't necessarily control what comes into our mind initially. We have a wide range of thoughts during the day. Our minds are active and we can think about what we're thinking about. In other words, the first R is recognize. Recognize what thoughts are going into your mind. And for athletes, some of them are fear-based, like you might mess up, they're watching, and you start to have these thoughts that undermine you. But the good news is you don't have to believe or harbor or entertain every first thought. And when those negative thoughts start to flood in, first recognize what they are. And there's usually some recurring ones. There's some common ones that are linked to fear that, are not going to help your performance. And then they're not going to help you off the field as well. They start to undermine who you are as a person. So negative thoughts, we all have them. They're first thoughts. First R, recognize what you're thinking about. The second R is reject what's not true, what's not good, what's not helpful. Reject it. If something's impure, if it's selfish, if it's inaccurate, right? All these thoughts that come into our minds, we can reject it. Like, not in my house. I'm not going to open up my front door to a thief and say, come on in, take what you want. What else can I give you? Here's my credit card. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to lock that door and say, not in my house. And these are hope thieves, these first thoughts that are negative. And we need to shut that door firmly. I was a goalkeeper and my job was to keep the ball out of the back of the net. This is almost like goalkeeper mode, except it's in between the ears. And keep those negative thoughts from getting lodged. Keep those negative thoughts from just landing there and ruining your day. And that proactive, almost again like an air traffic controller, which planes get to land and which ones don't. Like, nope, that one's doesn't get to land. So that intentional choice of rejecting then and saying, no, I'm not going to receive that. I'm not going to believe that. I'm not going to live with that today. The real estate between your ears is too valuable to let those thoughts just trample. And the third R is replace. And this is where you have a second thought that's ready and you replace it. So if your first thought is fear, what if I mess up? What if I don't play well? I let my teammates down. We don't win the championship. For me, it was as a soccer goalie, if I make one mistake, we might lose the game because in soccer, there's not a lot of goals. So what if I blow the whole game for everybody? And that thought would come in frequently. But instead of that fear-based thought, I'm going to replace it. And whatever is helpful for you, it could be an inspiring quote. It could be a phrase. It could be a lyric from a song. For me, I often went to a Bible verse, just like perfect love drives out fear. Like, no, fear doesn't come from God. That's not good. Like, I'm not going to have that. So replace it with a second thought that you choose, that you've got ready. And then now you've got that second thought and you're going to run with that. And it's going to redirect you. It's going to bring you the right motivation. You're going to go in the right direction. And it just reframes it. My junior year in high school, we played in, the Metrodome in Minnesota, 6,000 fans. It was a state championship. I was scared the whole game, white knuckle. I was just didn't want the ball to come to me. We still won, but I played terribly. And then I went in my senior year and it was like, no, I'm not going to do that again. Like that feels awful. I don't want another one of those. So overcoming fear, I'm telling you, what happens in your mind in winning those battles in the mind will directly affect your play. And this is a habit you can start to cultivate. And at first it might be new to stop and think about, okay, what were my first thoughts here? What am I holding on to that's not good? Okay, I'm going to reject it and now replace it and get a second thought ready. That's going to be new at first, just like any skill is new. I mean, at one point, tying your shoes was new when you were little, but then you learned how to do it. Now it's comfortable. Like, this is going to be new, but once you start to cultivate that habit, you're going to realize it works on the field, it works off the field. If parents are watching, you might get frustrated with your kid and then you have that second thought. You're like, my kid is a gift. Or as an athlete, you might just take it for granted that you get to practice today. You're healthy today. And instead of shifting like, oh, we've got to go out in the rain and the cold, like, I get to play today. Today is a gift. Like, there's a reframing from relationships to sports that happens with the power of the second thought. So it helped me so much in my recovery, and it's helped me so much in life. I ended up writing that book, The Power of the Second Thought, but it just came out of, I didn't even know what to call it at first. I just knew my mind kept going in the ditch, and I didn't know how to break the cycles. I didn't know how to get out of it. And when I saw that this works, I'm like, okay, I've got to share it with other people. So Power of the Second Thought, that's what I like to call it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's a good perspective shift. And it's also so simple at the same time. Like it's transformative, but also simple that we can like understand it on that level. And I think it's important, like you said, is build that muscle, build those habits, like do these things off the field, do these things in the off season so that when you go onto that field or onto that court, you're ready. And then it becomes second nature to you. So, that second thought becomes more second nature to you versus that first initial, maybe negative thought. It's just like with nutrition. We got to build habits. We got to build those routines. Otherwise, we're not going to be consistent with it.
That's right. Nick, you summarized it well. I could use this analogy from soccer and goalkeeping. When I first learned how to be a goalkeeper, I had no idea how to catch a ball. So that's kind of phase one. You have no idea. Like, you don't even know the power of the second thought exists. And then my coach said, you catch with the W. So the ball would come and I'd try to catch it and I'd look and I'd like, oh, that wasn't a very good W. That was stage 2. It's like, I know, but it's not working too well. Stage 3 is I'm going to hold this W no matter what happens. And it's like W, 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 and I catch it. And it is a W, but I've got to think so much about it. And that's stage 3, but it's starting to work. And then stage 4, I'm just diving to the corner. I catch the ball with the W, and I never even thought W. So same with the power of second thought. Nutrition habits, mindset habits, cultivate these habits. They're going to become more natural with time and repetition. But initially, you got to start to practice them because they're powerful.
Yes. Lots of good stuff here. I'm like, what am I going to post from this? There's just so many to post. I'm like, so many different ideas and quotes and key stuff. One thing I do want to hit on, because I know that some of my athletes and even some of my non-athletes are struggling with this, is this, back to the identity piece too, is, they're questioning their future in sports. Maybe it's an injury, maybe it's not an injury, maybe they're just simply they're in this transition stage, maybe high school to college, or whatever it might be, and they're questioning their future and maybe their sport, or maybe they're questioning their future altogether. What would be your advice to the guys and gals in this position?
That is common, Nick, and you're not unusual if you're going through that. And we could start with the sports context and then let's shift to life overall, because the two, there's some similarities in terms of feeling like I want to quit or give up, but they're also very different in terms of significance. For sports, I thought my 4 kids would just love sports. And what I found is that there's quite a range. And some of them just don't have that drive. They have the ability, but they just don't have the drive. And I didn't want to be the parent who forces them. I want them to be active, but I knew that I couldn't say, you got to have the goal of professional sports like I did. And it just wasn't them. So there's some athletes that are simply playing because a parent is almost forcing them, and there's been tension there for years. It's never been their passion, their dream. And that's okay if pro sports is not your end goal. That's okay. Or maybe just college sports is your end goal. That's okay too. So just taking some pressure off the athletes, especially if you're around an environment, you feel guilty, like, well, my parents have invested time and money and my coach is pushing me hard, but I've never actually enjoyed sports. It's never been me. You can find some other great things in life. Now, for most people watching, they are probably driven and motivated, but they're going to hit some bumps in the road. They're going to hit some challenges. There's going to be some storms. And what I would say is more along the line of persevering, because you only have a window in life to play sports. And I talk to a lot of guys I play with now that they chose to party during those years and they could never go back and play, college sports. And if their choices would have been different in terms of grades, in terms of lifestyle, like, they got distracted. And that's one piece that can take you down the wrong road. If you're starting to do stuff and now you're losing your motivation in sports because you're getting tripped up and you're stumbling in these other areas, your sports career can still flourish, but you might need to make some choices and get some healing and step out of some stuff. For some people, it's an injury. And what I'd say is don't give that injury too much power. Like, I tore my Achilles tendon a couple years ago. I was out for a year. But then once it healed up, I just ran my first marathon. So it's not the end of the story. And sometimes a delay doesn't mean a dead end. And you just have to keep going forward in that. Find some people around you who really believe in you and cheer you on and bring out the best in you. You might have one coach that's really difficult and kind of a headache, but don't let that one coach ruin the whole sport for you. Don't give that coach too much power. Maybe you had some tryouts where you were the best player, but you didn't make the team. Well, don't give those decision makers too much power. Keep going. There's a lot of people who end up playing at a smaller college, but still make it to the pros. So keep going overall. I would say don't let one obstacle. Instead, remember, it's not working necessarily against you, but it can work for you. And even in the most difficult situations, look at, how am I learning? How am I growing? What are some things I can take away from this? And I believe this is some of the greatest things in life happen in the most difficult moments. And the story's not over. So overall, find what motivates you. Know your why. Why are you playing? Why are you passionate about this? What I remind, like the Sounders sometimes, is just come back to the joy. Because why did you start playing sports? The joy. And then think about the different times, like high school or middle school or college, where it was just the joy and practice and games. And it's like, it should still be the joy. Professional's more complicated. There's contracts, there's different pressure, there's media, there's a lot of stuff going on, but don't ever let that steal the joy, and keep playing with the joy. So those are some things to think about if you're going through a tough spell right now with sports and you're just thinking, should I keep going? My encouragement overall would be that build up those resources, keep growing as a person, learn from those hard times, but absolutely don't give up and quit, because you don't know what's coming. And I'm telling you, just the opportunities I've had with relationships in sports. Now, I look back many years later now, it's like all those relationships, high school, college, and beyond, they're still strong. And sports are a way to really have meaningful relationships that are going to last your entire life. Don't step out too early. Now, with life overall, one thing I saw that stood out to me at UCLA did some research that 1 in 4 high school students are thinking about suicide. And that broke my heart because I've had 2 family members commit suicide. And I would just plead with you to not go down that road and don't make that decision. That there are great resources, there's restoration, you are loved. The pain that you're going through, there are suicide is a permanent solution to some temporary pain. And I know it's overwhelming, but there are pastors, there are counselors, there are friends, there are trusted ones, mentors, coaches that are going to walk with you. And you have more people that love you than you realize. Don't be too hard on yourself. And there's a path ahead that the best is yet to come. And my heart just goes out to people who are just feeling so low because I've been there. I mean, when I went through fighting for my life for a year, I was at that lowest place. But from that, I discovered a hope that I truly believe is available to everyone. And it's an indestructible hope that no one can take away. It's greater than our challenges. It's greater than our loss. And I mean, for me, that's led to, like, we have justchoosehope.org. That's a website. My passion the last 5 years is bringing hope, because when the pandemic started, I saw half of America feels hopeless. And that stood out for me. I thought, from the Census Bureau, half of America feels hopeless. And I thought, no, there's a roadmap, there's tools, there's habits, there's love. And we don't have to stay in that cave of hopelessness. And my encouragement is receive this hope that's massive and that's personal. And again, we could take a deeper dive, but that's just one resource. I'd be happy to connect with anyone that's watching right now and wants to talk. And I can provide, just listen to your story and provide whatever be most helpful for you in that next step. And what I've seen in life, Nick, overall, whether it's sports and in life, is just keep doing the next right thing. Make the next right choice. Today's a gift. And now let's make the most of the opportunity. And also, we can't do it alone. Like, my belief is we need God, we need each other. So let's encourage each other. Let's come together as a community. What I appreciate is that mental health is being talked about more and more for athletes. And it's becoming something that now also franchises, coaches are much more aware and caring and compassionate, and not just for the person and how well they're doing in terms of performance on the field, but also just caring for the whole person. And we need to keep going that direction.
Yeah. Make the next right choice. I really liked that right there. And and again, the community piece too. I think, a lot of us, we try to do it alone. We try to grind. We try to do all these things on our own, and it burns you out, number one, but also you're much more likely to quit. You're much more likely to give up if you're trying to do all this stuff alone. And so I think that's really important. Some really important messages there. What would be, so as we wrap up, what would be one piece of advice, like whether it be something we talk about or something we haven't talked about, that you, like, biggest piece of advice you want to leave the athletes with?
I would say appreciation. We don't have to play sports. We get to play sports. And as someone that, my professional sports career was taken away, I find myself just saying to athletes of all ages, like, enjoy it. Enjoy it. And I think that's when you're going to play best. That's when it's going to be kept in perspective. What I see is that it can quickly go over the top. And I just watch parents on the sidelines and what they're doing and the intensity they bring and how much they're yelling at their kids, or the game's over and they have 4 things they're blasting the kids on, and then they're yelling at the ref. And I say, if there was a ref cam and we could capture that video and then post it on social media, I mean, I think it'd be embarrassing. These refs, it's not like it's the Super Bowl. It's not like they're making millions of dollars. Like, they're just trying to make some good calls. And I think that's reflective. It's a symptom that sports can get over the top. And ultimately, sports can't meet our deepest needs, and sports should not be taken too seriously because you will lose the joy. At the same time, sports are an incredible gift. And I still love to play with people from all nations. Like in my neighborhood, we'll just pick up soccer game and all the friendships that come out. So I just say enjoy it. Don't get caught in the pressure traps, and continue to build relationships, because what you're going to remember 10 and 20 years from now, it's going to be the people, and it's not going to be the wins and losses, as important as they seem in the moment, but it's going to be the people. So that perspective right there is huge. For me, faith, kind of like Baskin Robbins 31 flavors in my family, but as an athlete, my faith made the biggest difference for me out of anything, even more than the training. So these different parts of our life, they're not compartmentalized. Like when I was well disciplined in school, it rolled over into sports. And when my faith got stronger, like I had a healthy perspective and enjoyed playing soccer more. So these different pieces are connected, and don't ever think that your life is just sports. It really is. There's a fullness and an abundance that the life that's truly life.
Yeah. And I think the big thing with faith too is that it forces you to go beyond yourself, number one, but it just makes you see a much bigger picture for everything, and it puts everything in perspective. I think
Yes.
that's a huge thing.
Well, it's like, okay, we're all loved, we're all equal. That's huge, because in the sports world, we're not all equal. There's superstars, or there's your starters, there's your MVP, there's the bench guys, there's the guys that get cut. And so there's always this message, like there's all these ranks. And then you take faith and it's like, well, God loves all of us, and I mean, I'm a Christian, so I'd say, Jesus died for all of us. Like his love is so strong and it's for everyone. So I think we break out of some of those cultural norms where like I'm better than you, because sports is all about competing and who's better time, who can lift more. And it's like there's all these ranks and better thans. And it's like, no, faith for me puts it all in perspective. It's just like the person you're competing against or your teammate, it's so much bigger than just the result on the field. And we need more of that in sports, that's for sure.
For sure, for sure. Now, I think this has to tie to what you just shared too, is what about your advice to the parents?
I would say for parents, just make sure that you're not projecting your own desires on your kids. Meaning, if your career wasn't quite what you wanted it to be, that you're not just determined that your kid is going to be, the next Sounder or the next Seahawk. And then you've got this dream for your kid, and then the kid doesn't really own it as much. So let your child have some choices as far as, what sports they play. And as a parent, I also just want to applaud the parents, because I know what it's like to drive around 4 kids to games, and you feel like a chauffeur, and then you got to have a system. It's like, where are the practices and how are we going to make it to all these practices? My wife and I are trying to figure it out, and it's a lot of miles. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of investments. Build that community with other parents, and you really do give a lot. Sports have become expensive, so you're investing a lot. And my encouragement to parents would be find a great coach, because the coach is going to set the tone. If you have an incredible coach, you're going to have a great culture. You're going to have good practices. Your child's going to be developed. They're going to communicate well. Like you're going to love it. And if the coach isn't great, those things start to fall apart. So do your homework as you choose clubs, as you choose different options. Find that great coach. And I'm thankful, like in college, I had Bobby Clark, who is just a legend, player in Scotland, but then coach. And he did everything so well that his impact went far beyond those 4 years or soccer. And the best coaches, they're really teaching your kids about life. How do you handle adversity and setbacks? And how do you build teamwork? And all those things the coach is going to bring, it's just through a sport. It's like, Nick, you bring so much stuff through nutrition. You're excellent with nutrition, but you know that nutrition also is just a platform to talk about life and go deeper, and it's going to open up those doors. So the best coaches bring that. And parents, let your work be done before the season in just finding the very best coaches.
I love that. And I think it's so important too with the coaches, because your athlete's going to listen to the coaches more than they're going to listen to their parents in many of these instances. So I think that's key as well, for sure. So I like that you emphasize the need for good coaches. Jesse, I just want to thank you so much for sharing all of this on the podcast. There's so much good stuff, like around the identity, around faith, around overcoming fear. Again, so many different nuggets that athletes, parents, and even coaches can learn from. And so I really appreciate you hopping on today.
Nick, thanks for seeing those other parts of an athlete's life and really valuing those. And I appreciate in your podcast that you enjoy going there and the different people you bring in and what you share too. So keep up the good work.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And for listeners, go check out Jesse. You got his resources in the show notes and the caption there. And until next time, keep striving for greatness.